All right, welcome back to Riders of the Dawn.
What's up? That was Matt.
And that over there was Stu.
And that's an example of terrible dialogue. So today's topic is going to be, you guessed it, dialogue. Dialogue in pretty much every capacity I can think of. And dialogue will go across multiple formats. Screenplay, novel, or graphic novel. All of them contain dialogue. All of them, you should approach dialogue in a way that's going to make the dialogue sound good. And to me, good dialogue is convincing. What do you think?
Well, what is dialogue? You've got to get to the core of it as it's two characters communicating.
What is dialogue? He asked in a meta sense.
In a meta sense, that's
right?
So meta.
Yeah, it's the words characters speak.
Yeah. So one thing. You want dialogue to be natural, and you want your dialogue also to be communicating things. So, like we talked about in plot, you don't want to waste words on a page, whether if they're dialogue or if they're descriptive or if they're expository. So, dialogue is a way for it's a means of conveying things to the reader, while also conveying it to another character in a lot of sense.
Usually dialogue is between two people. A character makes things audible so that another character can hear them and understand whatever that character wants to say or do. There's examples to the contrary, like there are soliloquies. There are plenty of dramatic examples where a character talks more to the audience than to any other person, or he's alone on stage when he talks. Those examples really shouldn't be overlooked. But for most things, you're probably not going to want to have a character give a soliloquy. Unless, maybe if you're in a novel, he can do it like in his thoughts, or something like that, where he's talking to himself. But you almost never have any kind of dialogue that just talks to the audience. It's two characters talking to each other.
And most often, it's a much more relaxed communication than your prose will be. Well, obviously, depending on your characters. If your characters are highly educated doctors and they're going to be talking about technical jargon, that's one thing. But if you've got two heavy metal players talking to each other and they're going to talk about, they're going to talk in the common tongue, so to speak.
Yeah, and that's really important, is that your prose can be florid if it needs to be, but the dialogue should communicate or should come from the place of who that character is. And there's actually a lot of good examples that you can go look at. One that I'll kind of point you to is, again, Lord of the Rings. Because Lord of the Rings, each character's dialogue comes from the place that character is at. So the hobbits talk in a much more simplified vernacular, much closer to like a modern English speaker would speak. When you hear Aragorn talk, it's a little bit elevated. When you hear other characters talk like elves, they tend to talk as if they're talking in verse or in like a high prose. And then of course Gandalf actually talks in a very down-to-earth manner as well, which is kind of representative of his character. So Tolkien has different characters talk in different ways to sort of represent who they are. But most often people are going to be writing characters that aren't like ancient elves. They're going to be people, and those people should probably communicate in the way that whoever's going to be listening to them is used to them communicating.
One of the best studies that you can do with dialogue is I really like television for dialogue specifically, because it's really fast paced and you can watch characters interact, and if you watch it enough you can really start to see what is believable dialogue and what is just kind of ridiculous. So for example, in modern sitcoms, multicam sitcoms, the pacing is so fast. You've got like 10 punchlines per page.
Yeah, there's pretty much 10 jokes a page, which equates to about 10 jokes a minute. which is really fast. It used to be a lot slower pace, but things have accelerated over the last years. Maybe because people are like afraid of getting bored. I'm not sure why it is, but definitely modern sitcoms are a lot snappier than their relatives of yore.
And you have to think that even though these are people bringing the dialogue to life, somebody wrote those words, and Stu and I have some experience with screenplays and teleplays, and you want to, just like a musical composer, you want to say the things that you want to say as exactly as you want to say them, and it's not going to be up to you whether the director lets the actor take poetic license of the dialogue, but you want the essence of the information conveyed to be there.
Yeah, you want it to be at least accurate. The other thing is, and you can just do this if you're whenever you're writing dialogue, say the dialogue aloud. Don't just read it in your mind, but actually say it aloud and hear what it sounds like. And if it sounds awkward, if it's awkward on the tongue, chances are a person probably wouldn't say it that way. Most people are going to speak in a way that's idiomatic of the time and place that they're from, and they're not going to say things which are, obviously difficult to say.
Yeah, and now Stu and I actually did this working on screenplays. Is we would read the dialogue to each other, and you see this a lot in kind of round table readings where everyone chooses a character and they read the dialogue at each other as though they were those characters, because this is really going to flesh out any kind of weird wording, weird vernacular, things that are going to stick out to an audience and allow you to make those corrections. Now, when I'm writing in a novel format, usually I'll write dialogue as it comes to me, as fluidly as I can, and then on subsequent read-throughs, I will find that it's awkward and alter it that way.
Yeah, kind of reword it. Yeah, when we would read it aloud to each other, anytime something came off as awkward or as too obvious, too functional, or just sounded stupid, or any of those things, or wasn't funny, we'd stop and we'd reword it in a way that's funny.
Yeah, and one of the big things is your character. Even though your characters are devices for accelerating the plot and for moving the plot forward, the audience doesn't want to see a character like that.
They don't want to see a character that's just moving through actions of a plot. They want a character that's human.
Right. So you want your dialogue to reflect that. You want to get the information across, but you also want that character to be who he is.
Yeah.
She is, right. So
the dialogue is really where people are going to attach themselves to characters, and I feel like people are really, really focused on characters. Characters are very, very important to a modern audience. That's why we have sequels of so many different kinds of movies. Is that people get really attached to the characters and the way the characters are, and they're the characters are the part that they want to see more of.
Yeah. So, like, for example, if we're talking about sequels in movies, people love Iron Man's dialogue because it's witty, it's snarky, and it brings audiences back. So these kind of things are a result of good dialogue writing. And yes, they're jokes. You don't have to tell jokes with your dialogue, but you do want your dialogue to be interesting and attention-grabbing. Another big mistake that a lot of beginning authors make is they use the space fillers that we use in normal talking, like and like. These are things that you just want to get rid of. You never want to start a sentence of dialogue with
unless, well, I'm gonna admit that unless you specifically need the for some kind of reason, like it's like someone's like, are you from Texas or not? And you're like, and then the person continues on, I knew you knew nothing, right?
Right.
So you can do it
as a space filler. It's there to right.
Yeah, only if has some sort of actual function in setting up the timing. Actually, it leads me to another thing, which is timing. Timing. Most writers don't think about timing. But if you stop and you read dialogue aloud to yourself, what you'll find is that the natural, meter of your reading will produce certain spaces and certain parts that are sped up. And sometimes for effect, you want a space between one part of dialogue and another, the way an actor would take a pause or take a breath, or the way you'd have a beat in a comedy. And the way that you create that space in dialogue, you should be aware of that and work to include it if it's part of what creates the effect of the dialogue, especially with comedy. So if we're like, it's like Stu, are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. Are you sure? Because you're bleeding. I'm fine. I'm fine. It's fine. It's fine. Call an ambulance.
Having that big pause is what creates the tension for the punchline.
Yeah.
And it's really important to have that timing.
So if you were writing that as a screenplay, you'd have, Stu would say, it's fine. A beat. It's fine. A long pause. Call an ambulance.
Yeah.
And you'd have the direction for how the actor's going to read it. You have to communicate how you imagine it in your head. Now, if that ends up in front of an actor, and that actor either has something else in mind that's effective, or the director has something else in mind that's effective for that scene, because they've included the set, they've included all the different parts that you're missing when you're writing it, or the actor isn't really capable of delivering it in that way in a convincing manner, but delivers it in a different way, then it'll be different.
But the information and the point is there.
Yeah, the point is there when they read it, but you want a reader to be able to get the joke.
Yeah.
You don't want to rely on the delivery of a comedian in order for comedy to come across. And that's a hard thing to think about when it's like writing comedy. People tend to think so hard about the delivery of a stand-up comedian making the joke funny, and that's really true. But your job as a writer is to communicate that delivery, so when the person reads it, they imagine that good delivery in their head. That good delivery is part of what you've written. And you can do it in narrative as well. So if you had the pause, it's like, you're bleeding, and then you could have some kind of description. Stu grabbed his knee and tried to look stoic. And then it's like, call an ambulance.
Right. Well, and this is something that I like to do a lot, is when you're having a normal conversation, conversations are not exclusively verbal. There's a lot of body language involved with how we communicate. So, we have nods, we have hand gestures that mean certain things, and we do naturally work these into our everyday conversation. And so your characters are probably going to do the same thing. So if someone is talking and waiting for the person that they're communicating with to give some kind of response that they heard them, you don't have to say, okay, said so-and-so. You could just say, so-and-so nodded, or so-and-so gestured in assent, or, there's things that are going to evoke the reader's imagination to let them know that the two characters in dialogue are communicating effectively without actually using words. And this is going to help your readers think more about the characters within their settings and not just in thought bubbles on a comic book page.
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing is, when you're writing dialogue like that, one of the things that can be an extreme if you go on the other side is giving the reader too much information. You want to give the reader the information that is necessary for the dialogue to be communicated appropriately. So you wouldn't be writing down, Jessica nods as David lists off the groceries. You probably wouldn't do that because the actor would either just nod or not nod. It's not important for you to understand it unless it's like, I imagine it like a job interview. Maybe you have a young woman and she's sitting up really straight and she's nodding constantly as the person who's interviewing her is saying all these things, and it annoys him. In that case, the nodding is important and you should mention it. But if she's just nodding naturally and nobody acknowledges it and it changes nothing about the scene, there's absolutely no reason to really include it. The reader can either fill that detail in, or the reader just can skip the detail. If the detail is irrelevant, you don't need to include it.
Right, precisely.
It's like, oh, I like his detailed writing. Detailed writing is good when the details matter. And if the details don't matter, then you can bore the reader.
Yeah, and this is a problem with, if you're an avid reader, you have people who you like to read because of the way that they write dialogue, or because of the way that they are sparse or explicit with their details. And so you need to be aware of this yourself. And one thing that I would recommend is the only way to get better at dialogue is to write dialogue and then to read your dialogue. So it's great if you have a wife or a girlfriend, write a scene. It doesn't have to be from a big work, but write a scene and then sit down and read it together. And if what you imagined is not what comes across, you need to figure out why that happened. Because especially in a screenplay scenario, you're almost never going to be across the table from the actor who's going to perform your part.
Yeah, you cannot rely on an actor's performance to make the dialogue have weight. A great actor can possibly turn bad dialogue into something sensible and good, but you can't rely on that, because no one's going to look at your script and all the bad dialogue in it and think anything other than next.
Yeah. And this is something about cinemas. Usually there's one really good element. There's good acting, there's good writing, and there's good cinematography. Rarely do you get all three.
Yeah.
Usually, especially today, screenplays just get butchered from the original intent, because it just goes through so many people with so many different ideas of what should be happening.
to where like the soul of it, the heart of it gets lost. I think I remember like Snow White and the Huntsman having like, how many reviews or how many revisions did Paul say? Like 30 or something?
It was so many revisions.
It was like 32 revisions, I want to say. That's just the number that's coming to mind. It was so high that I'm like, I couldn't imagine anyone was revising anything that number of times. There were so many revisions, they didn't know who to credit for the screenplay, because it had been through so many hands. It had been changed and changed back. No one knew whose screenplay it really was anymore.
Who did what or when. But whoever, I remember there was a bidding war over it. They really liked the original screenplay, but they had to tear it apart and turn it into something atrocious.
Wasn't atrocious is strong, but definitely I think the screenplay got butchered.
Well,
I think that's true. And another thing I'm thinking about TV, why TV is good to watch for dialogue. Two things going for TV. First of all, TV has much less capacity to tell a story visually than a movie does. And that's just a matter of budget. So if you watch Star Trek's 90% characters talking to each other, and like 10% characters moving across the stages and looking at screens, right? Mm-hmm. There's very, very little action in a Star Trek movie. Maybe a couple of seconds of like some phasers going off. And that's actually, I actually like that as well, because that's more true to life. It's like it's 90% the tension and like 1% the explosion at the end. Mm-hmm. But you can build a set, you can populate it with actors. It's very, very expensive to have long special effects sequences. So TV can't do that. TV has to rely on the quality of its dialogue and the quality of its stories for it to be effective. And I know that there's very high budget TV now, mm-hmm. and there's very well done TV. But I guarantee you, if you imagine the most visually exciting TV show and you compared it to a movie, you'd see that there's an exponentially larger amount of dialogue per total minutes than in a modern action movie. To the point where, if you were to watch, I don't know, whatever the newest, there's so many Transformers movies, I can't even keep track of them anymore.
Oh, I don't even want to think about it.
There's probably a movie, the movie's probably 110 minutes long, which is almost 2 hours, but the screenplay may be 80 pages long.
Yeah, because of all just the visual nonsense.
Which means there's 30 minutes of just visuals with no dialogue, because it takes just a little tiny space on a page to describe a scene where like robots fight each other. And really all you have to say is giant robots fight each other, Optimus Prime falls down and is broken. You don't have to say like really anything, because you know that the director and the special effects choreographer and all those people are the ones who are really going to just make all those decisions anyway. You just need to kind of describe the function of it. So I just imagine that like, and I don't have one in front of me, There was an action movie that I did look at the screenplay for, and I was like shocked how much shorter it was than the movie. And for those of you who've never really looked at screenplays, generally, same thing with, this is a little bit different with television, but with a screenplay, a movie screenplay, generally one page is with all the correct formatting, is equivalent to 1 minute of screen time.
Which is a really important realization when you're thinking about pacing, which is why I mentioned earlier that there's about 10 punchlines per page in a teleplay. That's going to tell you the timing of your dialogue. So if you have a conversation on page 50 and the resolution to that conversation isn't until page 60,
that's 10 minutes.
That's 10 minutes. Is the audience going to remember that original conversation? So things like that are important. I will say that I really enjoy Stephen King's dialogue. He does a really good way of characterizing people through the way that they talk. I know a lot of people might say that it's heavy-handed, but I really enjoy it. How he really just kind of takes the phonetics of what people say overboard.
Actually, I would say he doesn't take them that overboard. Let me make a point about that. So, Elmore Leonard said you should pretty much avoid writing too phonetically when it comes to dialogue. And what he meant by that is that if someone has a regional dialect that's really straight, like if you're trying to write phonetically someone who has a regional Scottish dialect, mm-hmm. the dialogue can quickly become unreadable.
Yeah.
Or so cumbersome to read that you miss the point of writing it phonetically.
Right.
So Stephen King will make a note when someone pronounces something weird. He'll mm-hmm. put the apostrophe if they cut the T off of a word at the mm-hmm. beginning, right? They're like, whatever. But if you ever decide to crack, I think it's Train Spotting is the one I'm thinking of, the original book. I don't remember who wrote it. But it's all written in like this Scottish dialect that just is basically unreadable. It's really hard to read. Unless you're reading it aloud and then you kind of hear Scottish accent came out. But you don't want someone from East London to have all of their dialogue to have apostrophes everywhere because they use glottal stops in front instead of saying T's and D's. You wouldn't want to see them say, if they say, this mouse thing's quite a lot bother, which it's from a YouTube video, but you don't want to say this maths thing is quite a lot bother, like he's mispronouncing all the words, and then you write all the letters that he's actually saying. Mm-hmm. No one would be able to read that, and it would annoy people. So you would just say, he's from East London, and here he goes.
Right. Well, I think for me, when I run across things like that when I'm reading, it's okay if the character is not on screen for very long, if that makes sense. So if the character has like one scene and then they're gone, I kind of like seeing that really messed up dialogue block because reading something like that tells me that the person that he's talking to is also having a difficult time understanding.
Yeah, the viewpoint character is perceiving that. That's a good point. So my point is use it sparingly. Mm-hmm. Because if you go overboard with it, it's going to make your stuff unreadable, right?
Now, if someone is, they're from East London, or they have a Cockney accent, but everyone else in the story has a Cockney, uses like a Cockney vernacular.
Yeah, if the story takes place
matter.
in East London, don't bother with that.
Yeah.
Just get people to action, and then it's like, can you say this with an East London accent?
Yeah. Yeah. So when you think even in narrative, you don't need to tell the reader anything more than that you're in East London and this is how people are talking. Well, this person was from America.
Yeah, this person came out and it's like, she noticed his country accent.
Yeah.
Country, a English country accent has a different accent than an East London accent. It's just, you don't have to write in their weird pronunciations.
And especially if the character who they're speaking to doesn't have an issue understanding them, then there's no need for all that. It is just unnecessarily cumbersome. Let's see.
Avoid functional dialogue. this is an important point because, and this is something that I think infects modern cinema big time. And I think it affects modern cinema basically because of the current trend of editing things really, really tight to where there's no space for people to sit around and have proper dialogue, have a normal conversation like they would have with another human being. So what you get instead is you have characters telling the viewer what's going on or what should happen. Where they're like, because there's not enough frames to visually tell you what happened. And of course, if you're doing narrative, there's no reason for functional dialogue because if you need to tell the reader something happened, you can just do it in the prose. You do it in the description. You don't have to do it in the dialogue at all. But I'm thinking of this one particular, this scene from Force Awakens, where like Poe is leading all the ships down for the attack on the Starkiller base. And, you know, they have a shot of his cockpit and they see like the sun is going away. They're like sucking the sun inside the planet. And he says, remember folks, when that sun goes away, she's going to fire. And it's like, he says something like that, right? Which the audience should already know that. It's like, it's like basically insulting the intelligence of the audience to tell them that. But because the movie was cut so tight, there was no scene like you had in A New Hope where you had, Jane Orr's briefing all the pilots on what they had to do with the Death Star and explaining the conditions for victory. Right. So you had to do it in the middle of action in a way that, like, that character never would have said that dialogue. He never would have said, guys, when the sun goes away, it's going to fire. It's like they would already know that, or they probably spent multiple hours traveling to this location where they could have discussed the parameters of the mission if somehow they were in a scramble mode attack, you know?
Well, and this also brings up I'm most familiar with hearing dialogue like that called stilted dialogue, because you have to hold it up with stilts because it doesn't make sense otherwise.
Yeah.
So anything that's like, if you read something or you hear something and you feel like it's insulting your intelligence, that is stilted dialogue.
Yeah, that's a good description. Because I had to use functional because dialogue should be functional, but I mean, it only functions to tell the reader something, or to tell the viewer something.
Something that the medium itself could have done just as well, if not better.
Yeah.
So by the fact that this planet smasher is sucking in the sun, we know that.
Yeah, we know that the sun's being sucked in, or we should know it. But maybe it could have been that they added that after the fact, based on like some test audiences. Like someone's like, "What's happening?" You know, because they somehow already forgot what was happening because of how like crazy action packed episode 7 actually was. I mean, it was a really action packed movie.
Yeah. So you'll know that your dialogue is stilted if you're ever saying to another character, "Yes, and now I'm walking over to the coffee pot because I just put the coffee grounds in a filter, and I'm going to fill this up with water because I'm thirsty and it's going to make this delicious coffee for me." Because who would say that unless you're actually giving someone instructions on how to make coffee? And then if you're actually giving someone instructions on how to make coffee, please don't put that in your book.
Well, maybe
maybe
you put it. Okay, you can have it in your book. I'm going to write a story right now.
All right.
Okay. So it's like he's telling the person how to make coffee because he has a brain injury. The guy just doesn't remember how to make coffee. Well, now you have a point where you get to where like the movie opens up and it's like, why is this guy telling him how to make coffee? And then he sits down and he gets up to make coffee and he's like, Bert, you already made coffee. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. And then you find out he has a brain injury. Like that he was in a car accident and his short-term memory is really messed up and he can't remember what he's doing.
So, all right, let's do a little experiment. If you're listening to this, I think it would be fun if we give you a little writing prompt just to let you practice some dialogue. What do you think?
Yeah, we can try that.
So, I think that's a really good idea. Let's. You're driving. You've got two characters driving in a car.
They're both writers. One's handsome, one's bald. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Make a story using only dialogue. And the end of that story has to
be where they arrive.
Where they arrive.
Oh, I'm already thinking of one that I think we wrote.
It's true. We already wrote one.
Yeah. So the entire story is the two people talking in the car, and the reader has to understand the story by the time they get to their arrival point, and the arrival point must be the conclusion.
There it is. So, what email address are we sending that to?
You can send it to Stu at davidvstewart.com, STU at davidvstewart.com, or Stu at dvspress.com. Both email addresses work. And if people feel like doing this writing prompt, I'll totally publish it on DVS Press and promo you if you want. If you have a blog, I'm happy to do promotions for people that like that kind of thing. And yeah.
And you know what? I'll even throw it up on MatthewJWellman.com. Glad to promo listeners if you guys are out there working hard like we are. And what do you think? I think that's it for today.
Yep, I think that's it for today. Now I am going to turn off the recording.
And I am going to sit here quietly while he does that after promoting my website, MatthewJWellman.com. I am Matthew J. Wellman.
I'm now going to speak my name and give my website. DavidVStewart.com, DBSPress.com. This is Stu.
This is Jay.
Thanks
Have
for
a wonderful day.
Thanks for listening to Riders of the Dawn.